Welcome to Momtroversial, the podcast that dives headfirst into the beautiful chaos of motherhood and dishes on the stuff we wish we would have known and nobody tells you. I'm Leah, a scrunchy nurse writing the Hot Mess Express, and I'm your girl's girl here to remind you that it's fine, we're fine, and everything is fine. And today I am missing my two wonderful co-hosts, Alyssa, your designated woman in any parenting bar fight, and Tori, our mom friend who will absolutely hold your baby and your secrets. Today, they are traveling, and so I am sharing with you my birth story with my firstborn, Declan. If you are interested or you missed it, last week, Tori shared her birth story with her youngest, Charlie. And then next week, I will be sharing my birth story with my youngest, Ella, which that one is one definitely not to be missed. So let's dive into it today because everybody loves a good birth story. So Declan is my oldest. He was born in 2022, the end of November. He was due December 3rd, but he was born on the 29th. I, at the time, was a labor and delivery nurse, and throughout my pregnancy, so many of you are going to want to punch your phone or your screen or whatever device you're listening to as I say this. My pregnancy was so smooth with him. I can't even begin to describe it. The only thing I had really was I was tired in my first trimester, but I also, as I'm yawning, I also had no kids at the time, so I could sleep in, I could nap when I wanted to. I just sleep was fine. That was easy to handle. I had a little bit of acne as well, but morning sickness, aches, pains just wasn't really a thing. I was a nurse at the hospital that I delivered at, which was also pretty bougie. And I worked literally up until the day before I gave birth. Um, so I did 12-hour shifts, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on the labor and delivery unit. I think that working was absolutely phenomenal for my pregnancy and for my labor. I think that's why I went into labor with him. I was 39 weeks and 3 days pregnant, and I went into labor with him early. Not early, early, but you know. And when I went into labor with him, I had just worked 3 shifts in a row. It was after Thanksgiving. I had worked Black Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then my husband, Travis, he had just worked 3 shifts in a row as well, but he did night shifts. He had worked Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. And Monday morning on the 28th, I was a psycho. I still kind of am. If you know me, you know, when it comes to working out and health and fitness. And I was doing F45 fitness. If you know what that is, it's a class group training that is a blend between functional training with strength and high intensity interval training. And I went to a workout that morning. It was a 8:30 workout in the morning. And that morning I went and I did my workout. And it's funny because leaving that hour-long class, I started contracting. At the time, it's so funny when I look back on it now. I was a labor and delivery nurse. I educated people on what to look for and what to expect when they were pregnant and going into labor. But when I started contracting with Declan, I truly did not know that I was contracting. At first, to me, I just felt like I had an upset stomach. It just felt like my stomach was crampy, like when you eat something bad or you feel like you may be getting a stomach bug coming on or something like that. And it was intermittent on and off, but it's funny because I do have to say the nesting instinct was real the day that I went into labor with him. I remember after the workout, Trav had come home and he was sleeping, and I had a list of things that I needed slash wanted to get done because I was like, I am due this weekend. I don't know if I'll go into labor on my due date, but I do know it's coming up. And so I need to go ahead and get these things done, like cleaning out our front room closet to store the stroller and making sure that we had the car seat down and cleaning all the junk out of the nursery and things like that. And so I started doing those things, and I was doing all those things around the house in the morning, and that upset stomach, like crampy feeling was still there. I just still was like maybe I am contracting. I'd been having Braxton Hicks, and the Braxton Hicks contractions, they didn't hurt. I would feel my stomach get hard, but it wasn't painful. And this was not that. And I just still, the nurse in me was like, this is uncomfortable. Maybe I am contracting, but I also know that this isn't uncomfortable enough yet to truly be labor because I've seen true blue active labor, and that's not this. And so I just went about my regular day, and I had an appointment with my OB that day in the evening, and Trav and I went to the appointment, and she'd asked how I was doing, and I told her, I was like, Dr. Morales, I think I'm contracting. I'm not sure. I know that it's not like active labor or anything like that, but I think that this is what contractions are supposed to feel like. And she was like, okay, well, let's check you, see how dilated you are, and see what's going on. I was like, okay. And as I laid back, she saw my stomach tightening, and she's like, oh, yeah, you are contracting, but it's probably just, Braxton Hicks latent early labor or something like that. It's definitely not active. And I was like, oh, okay. And then she had checked me, and I was 1 centimeter, 80% effaced, zero station, and she said very soft. So if you are curious what any of that means, we did answer like Bishop score cervical exams in our L&D Q&A, I believe. It was part two, but maybe it was part one, where we break that down. So that basically means dilated 1 out of 10 centimeters, and your cervix starts off where it's super thick and hard, and then it gets really thin. So super thick and hard in the medical world, we say is 50% effaced, and then totally, completely thinned out is 100% effaced, and I was 80. And then babies naturally start off really high, and then they drop down, and really high, we say is like -3 station. And then crowning is like +3 station, and he was at a 0 station. So I was 80%, so almost effaced, and he was at a 0 station, so he was about halfway. And but I mean, you still have to get to 10, right? And then the nurse in me knows that first time moms labor can take a minute. So Trav and I went home, and on the drive home, I remember the contractions just got way more uncomfortable. But in my head, I'm like, well, Dr. Morales said that this is just, Braxton Hicks, but man, I'm freaking uncomfortable. And we got home, and we laid on the couch. I think we got dinner on the way home. We laid on the couch, and we started watching Yellowstone. Do I have any Yellowstone fans out there? Woot woot. And I remember laying on the couch, stacking as many pillows between my legs as I could, like on my side, to try to make it more comfortable. And I was just so uncomfortable. And at this point in time, the contractions were about every 20 to 30 minutes consistently. And then by the time we had finished Yellowstone, they were about every 10 minutes. And we finished Yellowstone, tried to go to bed, I would say about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And I have taught patients this in the past. Now, would I still do this today with like where I'm at in my scrunchy girl journey? No. But I took a Tylenol, and I had another med. I don't remember what it was that's like made for sleeping, but is pregnancy safe. And I took both of those to try to help me go to sleep, but I could not freaking get comfortable through the contractions. And again, they were only every 10 minutes or so, but they just weren't comfortable. And so Travis was asleep because he was recovering from being on nights. This was his day that he was trying to switch back over to be awake during the daytime. And I didn't want to wake him up. So I, got in our tub in our bathroom. But when I'm sick, and let me know if you agree, yes or yes, I love the shower. Oh my gosh, I love the shower. And the way our bathroom was set up was you had like the standing shower and then a separate tub. But then in our guest bed bathroom, it was the shower tub combo. So I would start off in our tub, but I was like, man, I just want some running water on my body right now. And so I went back and forth between like our tub and the guest shower. And I was listening to music, and I was just trying to breathe through them and distract myself through them. And I did this from about 10 to like 1 a.m. 1:30. And I remember waking Travis up and I was just so freaking uncomfortable. At this point, I knew I was contracting. They were like 5 to 7 minutes apart, but I still knew that it wasn't enough for me to be in active labor. But I knew I was uncomfortable enough that I wanted an epidural. And so I woke Travis up and I said, babe, we gotta go. And it was so funny. I remember when we got to the hospital, and I think we got to the hospital about 3:30. By the time like I got him up, we mobilized, we left. Or I think no, maybe we got to the hospital at 2:30. We were in my patient room by 3:30. And I remember when we walked into triage, right? Because I work here. So I know all of these people being so worried that I was gonna be a weenie and they were gonna check me and I was still only gonna be like 1 centimeter, but I'm coming in and I'm like dying. Um, but I was contracting every 5 to 7 minutes and I was like 3 to 4 centimeters dilated. So I was like, I'm not a wuss, yeah. And my friend Larissa, she was the one who took care of us in triage, and then Tammy was the charge nurse, and she got me into my patient room. And I remember when we were in the patient room and I was getting the epidural, and I just felt like it was the longest hour of my life waiting to get the epidural. And when I did, I was just like, you know what? I can do anything. I can do anything. I'm gonna be honest, okay? Other people think differently, and there are a lot of people who are epidural haters. I am not one of them, okay? I had no issues postpartum after my epidural. I personally do not think that the epidural hurt bad going in at all. It felt just like getting an IV. I think that a lot of times the unknown and being like scared and anticipating it can make it worse. But also, I mean, I feel like I was also hurting bad enough that I just didn't care. And so I got the epidural and it was fast and it was easy. It did take a while for me to get numb. I think I finally got the epidural around 4:30 and it wasn't until like 6 a.m. that I felt like I was completely numb. Come to find out, Declan had been asynclitic, which means that he was head down. But when you want a baby, like you're going into labor, you want them to be head down, straight up and down. And he was head down, but at an angle, which means he wasn't pressing evenly on my cervix, which means that I wasn't dilating as fast, which is interesting because I was like 3 to 4 when I got there at 2:30 in the morning. But then when they checked me again after my epidural, I was only like 4 to 5. And so that is 2:30 to 6. It's almost 4 hours. And that makes sense why there wasn't much change because he had been cattywampus. And my epidural took a while for me to go completely numb because I believe it was my right side that I could still feel stuff on. But it wasn't 100% I was feeling, but it was just still a little uncomfortable because now with the epidural at this point, it just felt like the crampy from when I first started uh, labor. And come to find out, it was because he had been at a wonky position, and you can tell as a nurse sometimes when you check people. And so we did a bunch of flipping and flopping to try to straighten him up. And then my doctor came in around 8:30, 9 o'clock, I believe, and she broke my water. And I was 9 centimeters and 100% phase. She broke my water and she said, girl, you about to have a baby. And at this point, I hadn't had any Pitocin, everything I had done on my own. They had asked me if I wanted Pitocin because, I worked there. So they asked me, given a preface for everybody is you can say no. Like if you are laboring naturally on your own, you don't need Pitocin. You can say no to them starting it. And I did. I said, no, I don't want Pitocin. If you're going to do anything to me, like I'd rather wait and have Dr. Morales come in and break my water in the morning. And they're like, okay, that's fine. And so she did. And she came in, she broke my water, and I was 9 centimeters. And then by 11, they checked me again, and I was 10 centimeters. And Dr. Morales came in, and she was like, you ready to have a baby? And I was like, yeah. At this point, I am like stupid numb. So, something I like to tell people is epidurals are technically only supposed to provide 80% pain relief. You're still supposed to feel some stuff, but a problem that a lot of people have expectation wise is they expect to feel nothing. And so then they'll ask for more medication. And this happens all the time, even though like the pain you're feeling now is nothing compared to what you felt without the epidural. And then they'll ask anesthesia to come back and redose their epidural, give them more medicine. So now, and this isn't right, this is just, it is what it is. A lot of anesthesia people will set a higher baseline. So that way moms don't feel anything. So they don't need to be redosed later on. And so I remember I was like stupid numb. And I even asked them, I was like, I need you guys to turn this down. My legs felt like they were buried under sand, and the sand kept shifting on my body. And I remember before pushing and everything, I knew really well the nurse who took care of me. Her name was Carmen. She was one of my really good friends. She was a saint to Travis. Travis was so antsy because he just wanted to help, but he didn't know what to do. Like, this isn't his area. And I remember when he had been so tired, he had just done 3 night shifts. And I remember Carmen came in and she brought him coffee and she brought him snacks. And she just took such good care of my honey. And Travis still says that to this day. He still remembers when he thinks about Declan's birth, he remembers Carmen and how she took care of him and made him feel so much better because he was just freaking out. Um, and I remember I got in trouble with Carmen because the nurse and me knew that they were busy. Like, I knew that they were almost full, the unit, when I got there because I know where to look to see the board when we walked by. But I was trying to reposition myself, like turn myself over side to side instead of having Carmen do it, like adjust my monitors and everything. And I remember her coming in and I was like, can you like freaking just be the patient? Like, stop being the nurse right now. You just need to be the patient and let me take care of you. And that was so hard for me to do. And it's just something that I still laugh at because that's just so me. That's literally, if you know me, like that's me to a T. I just sometimes do too much and I'm not really good at asking for help. Anywho, and then it was time to push. And I remember it's just so interesting how different it is when it's you and when you're actually in the moment. I remember like sometimes they offer you to use mirrors to see the baby's head, and like we as nurses offer to take pictures. And I remember before I got pregnant, I was like, no, I don't want a mirror. I don't want to see down there. Thanks, but no thanks. And I was like, I don't want any graphic pictures on my phone. I'm good. And I remember when it was time for me to push, all of my people came in because you normally will have a scrub tech, a baby nurse, your nurse, and then the doctor. But then I had a couple extra of my nurse friends who were in there because, I mean, we were friends. And they took pictures for me and were like, listen, I'm going to take all of the graphic pictures. If you don't want them later, you can delete them, but you only get one shot at getting them. And I was like, okay, whatever, I don't care. And then I remember when I was pushing, y'all, I could not feel a freaking thing. The only reason I knew how to push was because I had coached so many people through it and seen them do it right, that in my head I just envisioned and visualized that. I felt nothing. So when Dr. Morales was like, you're doing such a good job, can you feel it? And I responded with absolutely not, I feel nothing. She said, okay, do you want a mirror? And I said, sure. And so I loved the mirror, actually. I loved using the mirror and being able to see while I was pushing because when I was able to see his head moving, and I was feeling nothing, it just was really affirming and reassuring to me that I was doing the right thing. And then I pushed for about 20 minutes, and then Declan was born at 11:31, and he was 7 pounds 15 ounces. I had a labial laceration, which isn't technically a full-blown tear, which is pretty amazing to me, in my humble opinion. And now looking back on some of the pictures, some of those graphic ones with like his head crowning are some of my absolute favorite, just because it's so freaking wild what your body can do. It's so freaking wild that us as women, like we do that. Our bodies not only grow these babies, but our bodies also birth these babies. And that is just something that I think is so wonderful about being a woman and a mom and empowering that we bring life, we grow life, we bring life, we sustain life. And that is just one of my favorite parts about birth. Um, so yeah, that's, my simple birth story. I feel like it's very vanilla, very cookie cutter. But I loved it. I loved it. The one thing I do want to share before I let you guys go for the day is, although I had a very vanilla cookie cutter birth story, my postpartum with Declan was really, really hard. And I just want to share with you a little bit about that because I don't feel like that's something that people always talk about. And I just really hope to empower and encourage other moms. So everything was fine the first 2 weeks with Declan. He was great. One thing I learned though is everybody says babies have this witching hour where they are like colicky and they cry, and that's just what babies do. And I mean, yeah, like clockwork, every single day, Declan would cry, and he didn't take a pacifier, and there would be times when he wouldn't want to eat or nurse. And now I know because I took the taking care of babies 5 months to 24 months sleep class that actually just being colicky and fussy isn't a thing for babies being inconsolable. 9 times out of 10, babies are overtired. Newborns have a wake window, which means the amount of time that they're awake in between sleep of 30 to 45 minutes. And that's until they're like a month old. And I remember there would be times that Declan was up for like an hour and a half. And we would joke about him just staring off into space and what is he staring at? And now I know that those were signs that he was tired. And I also remember being told by my mom and other people that you should sing to the baby, talk to the baby. That's comforting. They know your voice. That'll help calm them down. But if you're trying to calm a baby to sleep, you need to remove stimulation and not add it. And now, while they know your voice and the tone of your voice, when they're hearing your voice in utero, it's through all of this fluid, it's through muscle, it's through tissue, and it's also in conjunction with all of your bodily functions, like blood whooshing past them, right? So it's very distorted. And then to get them to calm down when they're tired, white noise, making it more similar to the environment they were in your belly helps soothe them in those, it's the 0 to 3 month stage. And that's something I definitely want to share. I'm a big advocate for taking care of babies in wake windows and knowing that from the start, because there was a lot of times when I was just overwhelmed because he wouldn't stop crying. And now I know he was tired and I was doing all the wrong things. Um, and I'm a big advocate, don't come at me, but I don't believe 100% in the mother's intuition. Like, if you having brain surgery, you would not go to a surgeon who says, I have this intuition of what I need to do for you, but I haven't done it before. I haven't got finished med school. I don't have like my doctorate degree. I didn't do my residency. I dropped out of my fellowship and I haven't done any research. I'd be like, no, thank you. You cannot operate on me. So why is it that when it comes to parenting children and raising children that you may have never done before and have no knowledge or education besides what you experienced growing up, that we expect moms to go off of their intuition to make these decisions? So I'm a big advocate for education, parenting education, from sleep training, potty training, how to handle emotions, tantrums, things like that. This is a sidebar and a side note. Because you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. And when we say that moms have intuition and just trust your motherhood intuition and your gut and whatever for doing things, and then things aren't going right, you feel like you're the problem and there's something wrong with you. But friend, there is nothing wrong with you. You just haven't done this before. And that's okay because there is someone somewhere who has, and they can help you. So, that being said, My other thing we struggled with postpartum is I had breastfeeding issues. And so a lot of people will say that they have an oversupply just because they produce a lot of milk, but they don't truly have an oversupply. I truly would pump in 10 minutes over 20 ounces of milk, okay? Newborns drink like maybe 2 to 3 ounces. My letdown was so aggressive that it would spray across the room about 1 to 2 ounces at, if not 3 to 4 sometimes when I would let down, that it would gag Declan and it would choke him. And he started associating like nursing in my chest with that. And so he wouldn't nurse. He would just scream and cry. And I tried to sit there and hold him because he also wouldn't take a bottle. I went to lactation, several lactation consultants, and I went a lot to figure it out. And I eventually had to do something called block feeding. And that's the only way to reduce oversupply. People will tell you if you have too much milk to pump before you feed or to pump after or whatever. But that's the worst thing to do. Breast milk is created based off of a supply and demand cycle, a loop in your body. And the more you demand of your body, the more it will supply. So if you have an oversupply and you're trying to get it to go down, by continuing to remove milk, you're continuing to demand that from your body, so it will continue to make it. The only way to get your body to decrease that is to stop demanding it. Which, yes, you're right. That does sound awful and miserable, and it is. So I would have to go periods of like 4 to 6 hours and only feed Declan on one side, and then 4 to 6 hours and only feed him on the other side. And I had to do this every day for about a week before I started to notice any result. And yes, when you ask, that meant that the one side that was not being used for the 4 to 6 hours was hard as a freaking rock. It was so uncomfortable. It took me 2 weeks altogether to finally get my supply to go down. Once we figured this out, and for him to be able to latch. And by this point, by the time I had gone through all of this and we had finally figured out what it was and what to do about it, Declan was about 4 months old. Okay, so now I have him breastfeeding well, finally, praise the Lord. But homie is nonstop spitting up. Like, I mean, mama didn't use muslin like burp cloth. I used the big old swaddles for burp cloth because of how much he was spitting up. He would wake up, he would feed, and then he would spit, 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 spit until he went back to sleep. And he was like uncomfortable and more crying and screaming, right? So at first we're crying and screaming because we're tired. Then I figured that out. And then we're crying and screaming, trying to nurse because I have too much milk. Okay, then I figured that out. And then we're crying and screaming again because we're constantly spitting up. And I remember telling the pediatrician, this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel right. I think he has reflux. And nobody believed me until his 4 month appointment when he went from being like the 80, 90th percentile in weight to the 10th percentile in weight at that appointment. And then she told me, this is the solution that the pediatrician gave me, to cut out one food at a time for 2 week increments until I see what the problem was. And I said, no, F that. That's going to take way too freaking long to diagnose the problem. I'm not doing that. I can't, like, my sanity cannot handle this. But again, Declan's now nursing fine, but he still won't take a bottle at this point. Like, we are practicing bottles every single day, but we usually end with me feeding him because he still won't take a full bottle. Um, and I will go into that too. So what I decided to do is I just cut everything. I cut soy, I cut gluten, I cut tomato base, I cut caffeine, and I cut milk. I cut it all. So I was eating very, very bland food. I did go through caffeine withdrawal because I was back at work now. I was a nurse. But I cut it all. And then I would add something back in and see if there was any change. And what we figured out that it was milk, which is a really common culprit. So if you're worried about your kid being way too spitty, my first and foremost thing I would encourage is cut milk, cut dairy, because I also had to cut dairy for Ella as well. And when I cut it, oh my gosh, the transformation in my kid was amazing. Oh, it was the spit up significantly decreased. He was way less irritable. He started smiling and he was happy. Um, And so that would be my encouragement. And if you think something's wrong, something probably is wrong. And it really sucks. We have to like advocate for yourself to get them to actually take you seriously, especially when you're a first time mom. But I cut dairy, and now like with recurring children, like that's just automatically I just cut dairy. Which isn't as hard as you think with all of the dairy alternatives. I think the hardest thing for cutting dairy is for me was like coffee and like cheese, but again, there's a ton of alternatives that you can use as well. Um, and so we got that figured out. The whole bottle thing, we finally got him taking a bottle because I took him to a occupational, no, it was a speech pathologist. I took him to a speech pathologist recommended by my lactation consultant because of how he wouldn't take a bottle, and like it was just a time and a half. And she taught me, if you doctor Google breastfeeding friendly bottles, a lot of these bottles aren't truly breastfeeding friendly. Because if you look down and you look at your chest and what your breast looks like, your breast is not this long nipple that then goes to this wide base. It is something that does progressively grow, and most of those bottles do not mimic a breast. And so the bottles she recommended were the Dr. Brown's wide base bottles and then the Lancino bottles. We used the Lancino bottles because I had a heftier supply and my letdown was still heftier, even though it was more controlled now. And the Lancino bottles slow flow is still pretty fast. And so that's the bottle that we ended up using. And I actually even had to go up to medium flow for him to finally be able to take it. And the reason why he wasn't taking these bottles was one, he couldn't latch onto it because all the other ones were weird and not actually breastfeeding friendly. And then two, for us in our situation, it was too slow. What he was getting from me was faster than what he was getting from the bottle, and so it would make him angry. It was like nipple confusion in reverse. And then finally, we started daycare because I was working, and he was sick every 2 weeks. And he was sick every 2 weeks for about May, June, July, about 3 months. And I was having to call out of work. And at the time, I was PRN, which means as needed. So if you don't go to work, you don't get paid. And I was calling out of work at least once, if not twice a week, because my husband's military. And so he can't just call out of work um, about every other week for 3 months. And that was a really stressful time for me mentally, especially with not getting paid. And then finally, I would say about the time he was about 7, 8 months old, we had feeding figured out, I had sleep figured out, I had the reflux figured out, and he was no longer getting sick all the time at daycare. And I think finally at that point was when I started to feel like my head was above water and I wasn't overwhelmed, and I truly, truly was able to start enjoying my baby at that point. And so, why do I share all of this with you guys on a birth story episode? Because although my birth story was pretty vanilla, my postpartum was really hard. And I was isolated by myself in San Antonio going through this all by myself. I had no friends, no family support. It was me and it was my husband. And Travis is phenomenal and I love him so much. There were so many times he would just hug me while I cried because I was so overwhelmed. Um, but he's also military, so there's only so much he could do. And so I share this with you guys because I just want you to know, if it's hard for you at first, and if you're not obsessed with motherhood or your baby or your situation at first, fun fact, statistically speaking, it's like 1 in 4 moms take 4 months to truly fall in love with motherhood. So you're not alone, and I want you to hear me, and it does get better. But as Margot said on our postpartum doula episode, embrace the hard and embrace the struggle, because you know something, if we never go through any hard or any struggle, I don't think the good and the sweetness is quite as sweet. And I have learned so much, and my patience and who I am grew so much through that journey with Declan. Oh my gosh, that kid, let me tell you, he is the light of my life, and I love him so much. He is a mini me, and although it was so hard, I am just so thankful that like we did it together. And Some people will say that firstborn, you survive your firstborn, but I truly believe the firstborn survives you because we have no freaking clue what we're doing. And that's okay because somebody somewhere does, and you can just learn from them. And that's why I'm a big advocate for reading books and podcasts and things like that from people who have already done it. So, I hope that this was helpful for you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Tune in next week to hear about Ella's birth story. Her birth story is not vanilla at all. It's pretty wild. And if you guys like our podcast, please, please, please take a minute to give us a thumbs up and like the podcast. If you even want to go the extra step and put a comment down below, that would be phenomenal. And if you guys have any questions or anything like that, follow us at Momtroversial Podcast on Instagram. DM us, and I would love to answer any of your questions that you guys have. And until next time, keep it Momtroversial. Bye.